So we're about a week out from the Conservative Party conference, which I will be attending again this year with our intrepid cameraman Rory, and I'm sorry to report that the Conservatives continue to be unmitigated containment for any kind of revitalisation of the culture and any kind of motivated action from the traditionalist right. If you'd like to learn more about what has been done to us, how culturally deracinated we have become, you can subscribe to our website for as little as £5 a month to get the audio track for Rory's latest article, The Preeminent Standard. This is a very metaphysically rich article about the local outlet centre in Swindon that used to be the big factory for GWR. And we walked around it today, actually. I'd never been there before, but I did proofread this, and it's fantastic. And it is like the heart of the town, the industrial manufacturing hub of Swindon, has been hollowed out by the anywheres of global brands.
You walk around that place and you think this must have been remarkable in its day.
Yeah. Yep. And now there are cranes and lights in the ceiling that would have been about 100 years ago been used to create great steam engines that are now hanging like ornaments above a Ralph Lauren and a KFC.
Hanging like corpses, I think you want to
say. Yeah. It's like the flesh pits in Mortal Kombat. Anyway, so on to the first one. With enemies, with politicians like these, who needs enemies? Rory Stewart. Just look at that thumbnail. For the audience who are listening, this is an interview he did in Novara Media. And that isn't edited, by the way. So sometimes Jack, our editor, pulls the faces apart in thumbnails to make them look frowny and funny. That's just Rory Stewart's face. He looks like a bulldog chewing a wasp. And the caption is, "We're not all evil." If you are promising that to literally a communist Ash Sarkar, you are the biggest cuckold in the country, even more so than Steve Baker.
This is him speaking on behalf of conservatism to a communist and defending himself to the communist by saying we're not all evil.
Not just that. He says, direct quote to Ash Sarkar, "I think you should be a politician and I think you're too worried about your skeletons in your closet." He's saying, literally a communist Ash Sarkar should be an MP.
She should join the Conservative Party.
She'd fit right bloody in at this point. He also, during this, he says that the backbenchers who end up rebelling, quote, essentially become commentators, which is true. And that's because the Conservative Party, with the front bench, act as containment. Like the very rare moment where Boris Johnson, mainly because of Dominic Cummings, decided to kick out people like Rory Stewart for wanting a second Brexit referendum or for dragging us kicking and screaming back into the EU. That is abnormal because you were rebelling on behalf of the regime, Rory, not for people like Miriam Cates and Danny Kruger and the like that are saying, well, actually, the Conservative Party is currently destroying the country. Maybe we should, I don't know, have family tax credits so that we don't need to bus in loads of Africans to replace our failing demographics. And they go, and that's why you're going to lose your seat next time.
So to be fair, the betrayal of the Conservative Party, actually, when you go back and look at it, they've consistently betrayed their voters going back to the days of Peel. But the Conservative Party in its modern form, I feel it really lost its way when Cameron came in.
Yes.
Because we had at that chance a choice between David Davis, who I think is a good man. I met him a couple of times. I think he's a genuinely good bloke, has the right approach. And we went for David Cameron. Now, what that basically meant is Cameron, and I was quite associated with the party at the time, and there were the people who considered themselves the modernisers. And the whole modernising agenda was basically to turn the Conservative Party into a blue version of a Blairite party. And they succeeded. It became a Blairite party. And Cameron's overwhelming mission was to change the selection process so that only blue Blairites were ever selected from that point forward.
He also wanted to make it, and he wrote about this, and I think it was in a Times article last year, to make it deliberately diverse. So he had all women and all BAME shortlists, well before even the Labour Party did in some constituencies. And that ended up with people like Liz Truss and Priti Patel, all the people that are totally ineffectual.
Well, the other thing though, because basically they changed selection at that point forward, so that if you displayed any hint of being conservative and believing in things like national borders, family, low taxes, free markets, you were immediately booted. They were looking for Blairites. The only people they ever made an exception for were people who were on their high priority list, which was basically things like black women, for example. And that's why the most based candidate out of the last leadership round was Kemi Badenoch, because an exception was made for her. It's like, okay, well, you like things like low taxes and small government. we're not really about that, but because you're a black woman, we're going to make an exception and allow you in the Conservative Party.
And also people that do the reactionary vanguard tactic of holding their tongue long enough until they get elected and then founding something like the New Conservatives, who even then are having to play ball with the front benches because some of the people are slightly less radical in that coalition. And they say, well, we agree with everything the government says, but also we want to reduce immigration by the hundreds of thousands. And the government comes out that same day and says, actually, we like our immigration policy where they're flooding you with 1 million foreigners a year. And so you just don't really get anywhere.
The only Conservative MPs these days remotely worth listening to are the ones who got their seats in the 90s or before.
There are some 2019 intake MPs that are half decent, but it's because, one, they came in with a genuine socially conservative bent, and two, they're petrified of being kicked out, like Danny Kruger and Cates.
But Dan, the process you were just talking about, where the Conservative Party was basically subverted by Blairites and then filled with them. I mean, that's an value-free analysis. That was an incredibly effective exercise in politics, right? That was that was good work. If you're looking at it purely on the basis of whether it was effective.
That's why the BBC in 2010 endorsed the Conservative Party.
Yes,
because they recognised that if you got to the point where even the opposition's Blairite. If you exchange, Blair was gone at that point. It was Brown. If you exchange Labour for the Conservatives, who are a Blairite party, that absolutely cements the Blairite legacy.
Yes,
it absolutely gold plates everything he did.
You're locked into the progressive trajectory inexorably, and anyone who gets in the way is just a speed bump on the road to utopia.
And it shows you the value of things. This sort of elite theory way of thinking, because it does show you that. At the top, if the two choices are literally populated by the same types of people who would regard each other as political friends, then the choice is completely meaningless.
Yeah, well, we'll get on to how that was the case. Very short window of time shortly. Just a couple more things from Rory Stewart here. Not that he says anything worth listening to. He literally says at one point in the podcast, people ask me, why are you not a Labour MP? And then he cites emptier prisons, gay marriage, and net zero as the reasons why he agrees with the Labour Party.
Presumably Labour is too right-wing for him.
Probably, yes. Yeah. He also says he attends the Bilderberg group, and he says, quote, I was a young global leader at Davos.
Oh, there we go then.
Right. So
the man has a podcast with Alistair Campbell.
Oh, yes. Yep. He also says his friend Mike Crawley, he was one of the heads of the Liberal Party in Canada, he says that he thinks Crawley, he and Rory, are basically the same person. So the man who wasn't Justin Trudeau but wanted to be is identical to the man who calls himself the true conservative. And he actually wrote an article about this recently in The Atlantic called What to Do When Your Political Party Loses Its Mind. I was a conservative until Boris Johnson expelled me. It was a painful experience, but here's what I've learned. And I think we'll learn that Rory Stewart isn't actually a conservative, like quite a few people in the Conservative Party. Reckoning with Johnson's legacy has made me very conscious of Donald Trump's takeover of the Republican Party. I wonder what general lessons can be drawn about alienation from political parties as it shifts from the centre-right to the extreme, again, marginalising anyone who dissents against your Blairite paradigm. I can hardly claim to have found a formula. I'm beginning to believe that conservative populism can be defeated and that there is a route back to the centre ground of democratic politics. Now, he actually cited Theresa May as one of his political heroes because she was willing to make compromises with the Labour Party, not doing a hard Brexit and not campaigning for rejoin, but just doing a soft Brexit where you lose everything in divorce proceedings.
But literally, if you told me Tony Blair wrote that, I would believe you, because that's just pure Blairite rhetoric. A return to the centre, democratic values.
It's not nearly as rhetorically smart as Tony Blair.
Well, no.
Don't give him too much credit.
That,
it's just the tribute act.
Yeah.
I was once...
That's the whole agenda. It's get back to the centre. What these people want, what all of them want, what all of the globalists want, is basically the rerun of, what was it, the 2010 election where you got three people on stage. It was Nick Clegg, David Cameron, and was it Brown? And basically,
I agree with Nick.
Have the same policies. Mm-hmm. That is what they want. They want, and that reference to Donald Trump. The true politics these days, the only distinction that matters is not blue team or red team. It's regime or anti-regime.
Yeah, are you inside the club or outside of it?
Yes.
Absolutely. And here's the revelatory part. Quote, I was once a Labour Party member, but my years working in Iraq and Afghanistan alienated me from Tony Blair's technocratic triumphalism. What different policies do you suggest? Rory, you host the podcast with Tony Blair's spin doctor? You're just a liar. Come on. I was drawn to David Cameron because I felt it better reflected my instincts about tradition, country, the wisdom of local communities, restraint abroad, and prudence at home.
What, to destroy all of those things?
Apparently so, yes. I became a member of Parliament in 2010 when Cameron led a coalition government. We campaigned and voted together not for localism, but also for gay marriage, net zero emissions growth, and far more spending on international development. So we campaigned not just on localism, but globalism as well. Literally
Wonderful.
globo homo. Thanks very much. When later as a government minister with responsibility first for prisons and then for the environment, I moved to reduce the number of people incarcerated and double the UK's expenditure on tackling climate change. So we voted to spend all your money on the Sky Demon and let criminals out. You're just a scumbag. Like, no, well, the political party didn't go mad by electing Boris. Actually, Boris just betrayed pretty much everyone that had voted for him from the general public. But the act of madness was not kicking you out. It was keeping you in for as long as they did, and then still retaining your general sentiment even after you were long gone. So speaking of someone that didn't share his sentiment, at least a little bit, Liz Truss, there's a book out soon by John Murray called The Right to Rule, and it actually tables some of the events from the last days of the Truss administration.
That might actually be quite interesting, that.
Well, it is quite interesting, because in here it details how Kwasi Kwarteng found out he was getting sacked. And he was on
he was on a flight, wasn't he, or something?
He was on the drive back from a Washington meeting with loads of people. He was actually at the IMF summit. There we go. And Truss had asked him not to go. Right. And when he landed in London, didn't expect to be fired. Minutes away from number 10, he saw a tweet from the Times political editor, Stephen Swinford, revealing that he was being sacked. So he found out over Twitter.
Yeah, and that was a blunder for Truss. That really.
Yes. Well,
I mean,
Kwarteng told her that, apparently.
Right, okay.
That's quite interesting. For 20 minutes, sitting around in the coffin-shaped cabinet table, Kwarteng tried to persuade Truss that killing off his cabinet career would also sound the death knell for her. They're going to come for you, warned Kwarteng. Yes. They're coming for me already, said Truss. They're going to ask you if you sacked him for doing what you campaigned on, why are you still there, he warned. Reporters would do just that in the hours after the press conference, without drawing a clear answer. Kwarteng, who's asked who his replacement would be. The answer, Jeremy Hunt. Hunt? Kwarteng said, he's going to reverse everything. Now, Hunt, how he got the job is fascinating. They call him a Tory centrist in this article. I think he's an actual communist because he married one, but there you go. He was on holiday in Brussels. He got a text from Liz Truss on her new phone number asking him to call him. He ignored it because he assumed it was a prank. Even he didn't believe that the coup was being pulled off, right? So after Kwarteng...
I always say this about Truss. Right instincts, thick as a plank.
Oh, yeah. She's properly dim as a 2-watt bulb. But she, again, when you say right instincts, she was over the mark of a sort of fissure of weakness for the global project. This is something that AA has spoken about before. You have a sort of distinction between the neocons and the globalists and the Conservative Party, and Truss is in the neocon camp. She's very pro-Ukraine, but she's also for national sovereignty against intersectionality and against sort of open borders stuff, sort of. She wanted to do free trade with India, which I think is mad, but there you go. And so that's why they got rid of Boris and Truss, because they're progressives, but they're just a bit slower than the actual rate of change that the globalists would quite like. So Truss then gave her resignation about 6 days later. James Bowler, who was the incoming permanent Treasury Secretary, who was replacing someone, he was summoned to tell Truss how challenging the situation was. Quote, one source in the room summed up his message. He made crystal clear that there are a lot of very intelligent, very wealthy people who don't do politics, look at numbers only, who are absolutely prepared to smash Britain to pieces on the markets. They were betting against us and they were going to win. We'd lost the confidence of the markets and we were in a very, very weak position and the whole thing needs to be junked. One source, and so that's the assessment of the guy who was saying, well, the markets are acting in consonance against us and they're happy to destroy our country. So was it that Liz Truss really broke the markets, as we've discussed before?
Rates are higher now than they were then.
Yeah, that's curious. It's almost like Rishi Sunak moved in and decided to spend more money and make more spending commitments, and the markets didn't go wobbly because they agreed with everything he wanted to do. And so Liam Halligan, who's a financial analyst for GB News, he actually points this out, and he puts it far more succinctly to Nigel Farage than I ever could. So as an economist, Dan, I just wondered what you made of his assessment.
There we go. She said, the reason my policies failed is because even though I was elected off the back of them by the Tory faithful, there was massive pushback from the blob, from overpowerful administrators, from lefty bureaucrats, as she put it. I mean, she looked at the economic secretary of the BBC in the eye and said, you are part of the problem, Faisal, because you are asking me questions like that. Endless questions. Will you apologise? Will you apologise?
But when it comes to the Bank of England, for example, she has a point, Liam Halligan.
She does. And I asked her about this and she was a little bit reticent maybe to go there because these are really deep waters. Did the Bank of England effectively oust her by doing things that undermined the gilts market in the run to a mini budget and then doing things which strengthen the gilts market and therefore mortgage rates when, you know, her nicey adults in the room successors, Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt, came in. And I think that the Bank of England did do that. And that's what the record shows.
And the IMF.
The Bank of England did something called quantitative tightening in the days before the mini budget, which basically means they throw billions of pounds worth of gilts or government IOUs at the market, which of course makes it harder if a politician is saying we are going to borrow a certain amount of money. And then when Truss was out the door, they then reversed that and did something which supported the market, So it made it look as if traders were euphoric when Sunak and Hunt came in. And yet still, rates are now higher, mortgage rates are now much higher than at the height of her mini-budget.
Look,
yeah, he's absolutely right. And there was no question that what he just described there, where they basically pushed yields up by oversupplying the bond market at the time and then reversing on the others. There's no question that happened. The only question is whether it was deliberate or not. But you got to think, I mean, the Bank of England, did they not understand the mechanism?
Yeah, it just so happens that their guy who also wanted central bank digital currencies was positioned in prime position to be the next prime minister by default.
Yes, and I can't unequivocally prove that the Bank of England were conspiring against her. All I can say is it looks a lot like they were.
Yeah, it stinks to high heaven.
Yes.
Yeah. There's also Truss being out of ideological lockstep with the rest of the party. And that is that, and again, this isn't a Liz Truss fan club or anything here, very dim, but preferable. She turned around very recently and said that schools should be banned from allowing children to socially transition. As we're on YouTube, I will not make a comment on Liz Truss's policy.
Oh, yes, we have to be pro the alphabet people, don't we?
Yes, very, very, very pro. Pride Month is over, but it should be Pride season.
Get your bits cut off. All that kind of stuff. Yeah.
She turned around and said, this is, at the moment, the reason she said this is because there's a sex ed inquiry about the appropriateness of things that are going on in schools, which we've been thankful to contribute to here over at lotuseaters.com, that says, maybe children in primary school shouldn't learn about bumming. Maybe that might be a bit inappropriate.
Controversial.
And Stonewall turned around and went, and you're a racist. And of course, the Conservative Party, being really dedicated to child safety, the Education Secretary, being a very competent person, Gillian Keegan, she went and blocked the results coming out.
I hate these people.
Why would you do that? Is it because you're getting really bad advice from Whitehall that want to slow this down? Or is it because you know how long, hashtag 13 years, you've been in government and this looks really, really bad, that this has been going on state-sponsored in every school under your watch, and so you don't want it to get out to the public? Oh, yeah, sorry about that. We were teaching you kids to make sex organs out of bananas and hand lotion, something that actually happened in Swindon, by the way. Yeah, so about now 50 Conservative MPs had urged Rishi Sunak to launch this inquiry. He signed off on it because obviously he's petrified about getting kicked out of the next election. That's why he's slowed down net zero just a tad. He's going to be screwing our wallets over just a little bit slower. And now they're turning around and going, what the hell? Like, this inquiry's been going on. We've fed loads into it. It's been in the press. Cates has been writing endless articles for the Critic and the Telegraph about it. She actually wrote a recent one here of where we're saying this is an obvious political win for the Conservatives. Every parent doesn't want sex stuff put in front of their child, or their child coming home with different name or different pronouns without their saying so. So why aren't you doing this? And it just seems to me that either the Conservatives are too dim or too ideologically motivated, again, hashtag not all, to realise that this is containment or is actively sabotaging their electability and the health of the country.
I really do wonder with things like this, though. Like, do they really believe this stuff, or are they just seeing that this is a clearly elite-driven project, all of this stuff? And are they just in that bubble where they don't even realise the extent to which normal people hate this stuff?
Well, I think you are perhaps underestimating just how high level you can be a Conservative politician and thick as pig shit. Because Theresa May, in an interview with The Telegraph, says she's a proud woke woman.
Oh, good.
Yes, I'm really glad.
Is that a literal quote?
Yes, she's woke and proud. There we go. She called for a sensitive approach to issues surrounding gender. So she was asked whether she was a woke woman, and was asked in the past whether she was a feminist. And she said, well, I wore a T-shirt which said, this is what a feminist looks like. Just do a physiognomy check. Yep, seems about right. When Miss Davidson asked the ex-Prime Minister about a line from her book titled The Abuse of Power, in which she discusses the term woke, she said, when you were writing about wokeness, you said the Oxford English Dictionary of definition woke is well-informed, up-to-date, and chiefly alert to racial discrimination and injustice. The Oxford Dictionary definition of woke, about being aware of systemic injustices secretly lurking under every rock. Apparently, Theresa May thinks that's correct.
But what the wokeness is undermining everything and screwing up the next generation. Just remind me, does Theresa May have children?
No. But she does have a husband who secured loads of the security contracts for the G7 meetings, and she just so happens to be one of the richest MPs in Parliament.
Weird.
Right.
Very odd. She's like our very own Nancy Pelosi.
Woke might work for you in those circumstances.
Yes. Yeah, she might have a lot of money.
The costs of supporting wokeness are a hell of a lot lower if you don't have children.
Yes, luxury belief, after all. And so when she asked Theresa are you possibly a woke woman? It's a direct quote. Theresa May said, in the terms of that definition of someone who recognises that discrimination takes place, sadly that term has come to be used as part of this absolutism and politicisation of politics. But when pressed, she said she was woke and proud, and she said, yeah, I am. Boomer midwittery at its finest. And unfortunately, that boomer midwittery is what has been running our country, whether or not Theresa May has been in office or is crying at a podium resigning or not. I mean, the frustrating thing as well is when this was put out on Twitter, you just look under it and it's all the Windrush black nationalists, of course, because it was our second founding. And they're there going, oh, you deported all my family members. You literally put us in camps because we didn't have a passport for the 1950s and all that. It's like, I wish that the Conservatives were as like a fraction right wing as the Guardianista leftists accuse them of being. She's just come out and she said she's one of your girls, and you're turning around and saying she's basically Franco 0.2. And it's like, no, this is why we are in the same trajectory of travel, no matter what color, blue or red stripes are on the car. It's because
a choice of regime or regime.
Yes, exactly. And so, yeah, we'll be doing dispatches from the Conservative Party conference floor, where the Tony Blair Institute has panels on every single day,
and also the LGBT Conservatives as well.
I'll be having a chat with Luke. I'm sure.
Enjoy that.
Be saying hello. We won't be going to their disco night, I'm sure, on the bloody Wednesday, because last time they had a drag queen at it.
You'd know.
Well, we got drag. Rory said we actually had to go to the.
Was the drag queen at least an adult, not a 5-year-old?
I don't know. I didn't ask. Didn't ask how it identifies, unfortunately. But the fact that we're even having this conversation just proves that the party is heading for defeat, and it's hard pressed to say deservedly so. My only frustration is, and I was speaking to Katie's staffer about this, is that there's going to be some based MPs who are on the margins, who are in precarious red wall seats, who are currently pushing all the right things, and they only have like a 7,000 vote share, and they might be ousted. So it's actually difficult whether or not the opposition, when they have to reflect upon themselves, will be right-wing either. So, yeah, we're going to get some reflections from a Ravage conference, so look out for that video on the website soon. But Conservatives to lend a rest, I suppose.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content that's on the site, such as the Epoch series, this episode on the Battle of Kohima. If you'd like to find out what else is being put out, you can follow on Getter at lotuseaters_com on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.